I remember the exact moment my life tilted sideways, though at the time I had no clue it was coming. It was a Thursday evening, September 12th, 2019, and I was sitting in our cramped Brooklyn apartment on Monroe Street, nursing a lukewarm cup of black coffee and scrolling through emails I didn't care about. The city was doing its usual symphony outside, the wail of a distant siren, the muted rumble of the L train above, someone yelling across the street about who knows what. But inside, everything felt unnervingly quiet. Too quiet. Even my cat Jasper, who usually demanded attention every 10 minutes, was curled up in the corner, pretending I didn't exist. Earlier that week, my wife, Olivia, had told me she needed time alone. At first, I thought it was just stress, maybe work, maybe the long hours at her advertising job, or the fact that we'd both been skimping on sleep since moving into this neighborhood. But there was something in her eyes, something she didn't say that gnawed at the back of my skull like an itch I couldn't reach. I brushed it off, as I always did, pretending I wasn't the kind of guy who notices the tiny shifts in behavior, tiny silences, a delayed smile, the way she'd pause before answering a question about her day. Our life before that moment wasn't perfect, but it felt safe in that suburban meets city blend of Brooklyn. We were 28 and 29, married just over 3 years, and living in a one-bedroom apartment that smelled faintly of vanilla candles and old books. I worked as a freelance web designer, which meant I spent hours hunched over my laptop, headphones clamped on, coding websites for local businesses, while Olivia climbed the corporate ladder at an advertising agency downtown. She was brilliant, the kind of person who could charm clients while drafting emails that read like poetry. I loved her. I still do, in a fractured, aching way. The warning signs had been there, subtle, like shadows in a photograph I didn't develop right. She started staying late at the office more frequently, claiming it was important campaigns. But she would come home smelling faintly of another perfume, one I didn't recognize. At first, I thought maybe she borrowed it from a client or a coworker. Stupidly, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. I still do, when I'm honest with myself. But that Thursday, while she was out, her supposed time alone, I got that itch in my chest that refused to be ignored. I remember pacing the apartment, the floorboards creaking under my socks, thinking about the conversation we'd had that morning. She had sat across from me at the tiny dining table, stirring her coffee like she was thinking of 100 things at once. "I just need a few days to myself," she said, voice steady, eyes trained on the swirl of cream in her cup. "I need to figure some things out." I nodded, the words lodged somewhere in my throat. "Okay," I said, "if that's what you need." But even as I said it, a chill ran down my spine. It wasn't just a feeling. It was a whisper of instinct I couldn't ignore. The kind of premonition you get when a memory refuses to materialize until the moment it matters most. That evening, with the city humming around me, I opened my laptop, not to work, though I told myself I would, but to check her email. Not her main email, no, that would have felt too invasive. But there was a secondary account she occasionally left open on the laptop. It was hidden in a folder I'd never paid attention to. When I clicked on it, my chest tightened in a way I hadn't expected. There were messages there, cryptic, casual, but intimate in a way that instantly made the hairs on my arms stand up. They weren't the kind of emails she sent to coworkers. They were personal, flirty, secretive, and in those few lines a world I didn't know about her existed. I closed the laptop, heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe old friends, maybe harmless banter. But then came the next thing I never saw coming, a digital footprint that led to an address. Just an apartment number, a floor in a building in Williamsburg, not too far from ours. Something in me, the part that refuses to ignore instinct, snapped. I knew I had to see it for myself. I grabbed my keys and slipped out into the evening air. The smell of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor mixed with the faint tang of the East River. The city, so alive, so indifferent to my unraveling world, stretched around me. I hailed a cab, heart hammering, thinking about the years I had spent trusting someone who now felt like a stranger. The ride was short, but it felt endless. My mind replaying every moment, every glance, every laugh we shared, and twisting them into questions I didn't want answers to, but desperately needed. When I reached the building, I lingered in the shadows. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your own heartbeat deafening. I saw her through the frosted glass of a lobby door, laughing with someone. A man I didn't recognize. My stomach sank, a hollow, twisting ache that left me almost unable to breathe. It wasn't just the betrayal, though that stung like fire. It was the realization that she had built an entire life outside of ours, one I knew nothing about. One I wasn't invited into, I didn't knock, didn't confront. I didn't know what I could say that would make any sense in that moment. I just watched, heart breaking in slow motion, until she disappeared up the elevator with him. The sound of her laughter, casual and bright, reverberated in my skull long after she was gone. Walking back to my cab, I felt the city close in around me. The lights of Williamsburg felt different now, harsher, almost mocking. The smell of roasted chestnuts, the faint perfume of autumn leaves, even the damp brick walls of the streets. All of it was tainted with the realization that nothing was as it seemed. I got home around midnight, poured myself another cup of coffee, and sat on the edge of our bed, trying to remember what it had felt like to trust completely. Without hesitation. As I sat there, I remembered the first time I met Olivia, April 23rd, 2013, at a friend's rooftop party in Manhattan. She had been wearing a yellow dress that caught the sunset just right, her laugh louder than anyone else's, magnetic in a way that made it impossible not to notice her. I remembered thinking even then that this woman could change the world, or at least she could change my world. And for years she did. She was my everything, my safe place, my complicating chaos. And now, sitting alone in that apartment, I realized that the safe place was gone, that the person who promised honesty, who promised loyalty, had crafted a hidden life, meticulously in plain sight. My mind reeled with questions, with what-ifs, with memories reframed through a lens I wasn't ready for. Every joke, every whispered promise, every touch suddenly felt like a puzzle piece in a picture I didn't recognize anymore. I fell asleep that night on the couch, Jasper curled against my chest, the city outside oblivious to the storm inside me. I didn't know it then, but that night was the beginning of a descent I wouldn't fully understand until months later. A slow, painful unraveling that would force me to confront not just her betrayal, but who I was, who I had been, and what love really meant. The next morning, I woke with the weight of insomnia pressing down on me. My body exhausted, but my mind still spinning through every detail from the night before. The apartment felt different, almost alien. Sunlight spilled through the blinds, highlighting dust motes dancing lazily in the air, but it didn't warm me. It only reminded me that everything, our life, our marriage, my trust, was built on a foundation that had been quietly hollowed out. I tried calling her, of course. My thumb hovered over her number for what felt like hours before I summoned the courage to press it. The call went straight to voicemail. Not surprising, really. I had expected her to dodge me, but that didn't make the silence any less brutal. I left a message, careful, measured, trying not to let panic or anger bleed through. "Hey, Olivia. Call me when you can. We need to talk." Then I put my phone down, only to pick it back up 30 seconds later, staring at the screen like it held the answers to questions I wasn't ready to ask. I spent the day in a haze. My work laptop was open in front of me, but every line of code blurred into gibberish. The emails I had planned to send went unsent. My mind replayed the image of her, that laugh, the stranger's hand brushing hers, the casual intimacy I wasn't supposed to see. I tried to convince myself it might be nothing, that maybe I'd misunderstood, but deep down I knew better. You don't stumble on an address, a hidden life, and a secret apartment by accident. That evening my anxiety pushed me into action. I couldn't just sit there paralyzed. I needed proof, something undeniable. So I decided to go back to see for myself what she was hiding. I don't remember if it was courage or desperation driving me, but when I walked through the streets of Williamsburg again, the city felt oppressive, almost like it was closing in, reminding me with every step that life as I knew it was gone. I parked a few blocks away from the building, trying to remain invisible. My hands were trembling, the kind of trembling that comes from fear and rage mingling in equal measure. Every passerby looked like they could see right through me, I kept thinking about the months before this. The subtle changes, the late nights, the excuses, the silences. And every memory now felt like a puzzle with pieces deliberately removed, leaving me to fill in the blanks with suspicion and dread. When I finally got to the apartment lobby, I forced myself to slow down, to breathe. My heart was hammering in my chest. I told myself this wasn't just about catching her, it was about understanding. About finally confronting reality. I took the stairs instead of the elevator, each step a countdown to the moment I had tried to avoid. The moment I had feared, yet somehow, on some twisted level, ended at the third-floor landing. I saw the door. The number was small, unassuming, almost ordinary, but it might as well have been a neon sign flashing betrayal in bold letters. I lingered in the shadows, listening, laughter, voices. One of them unmistakably hers. And then I saw them through the frosted glass, Olivia and the man. They were close, the kind of close that made your stomach drop, the kind that obliterates years of trust in an instant. Something in me cracked. It wasn't rage at first. It was disbelief, the hollow kind that leaves you weightless and shaky. My hands clutched the railing so hard my knuckles turned white. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. I wanted to knock, demand answers, demand apologies, but I couldn't. I just stood there, feeling my own chest tighten until breathing became a conscious effort. Eventually, she disappeared into the apartment with him. The door clicked shut behind her. The sound hit me like a punch, reverberating in my chest, echoing in my mind. I remember thinking, for a fleeting second, that maybe I had imagined it. Maybe the city, my tired brain, the stress of our routine had played a cruel trick. But no, the proof was right there. The apartment, the hidden messages, the man, this was real and it was happening. I didn't move for a long time. The city around me continued its indifferent hum. Someone laughed down the street, a dog barked, a cab honked, but I didn't notice. Time had slowed. My mind was consumed by flashes of her. Her smile when we first met, the way she always smelled like jasmine in the morning. The nights we stayed up talking about our dreams in that tiny apartment. And then, each memory twisted, overlaid with the knowledge that she had been living a double life, carefully orchestrating a parallel reality that I wasn't allowed into. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I wandered the streets, my shoes scuffing the cracked pavement, the neon signs and storefront lights blurring together. I ended up near the East River, leaning against the railing, looking at the water dark and still under the moonlight. I kept asking myself why. Why would she do this? What did I miss? Every answer that surfaced was worse than the last. I'd loved her blindly, trusted her implicitly, and now that trust had been weaponized against me, sleep didn't come. I barely ate. The days that followed were a numb spiral. I replayed every conversation, every small disagreement, trying to pinpoint when the cracks started. Friends noticed. "You look tired, man. Everything okay?" One of them asked. I lied, because I couldn't bring myself to spill the chaos boiling inside me. I couldn't tell them that the person I had vowed to spend my life with had built a secret world where I didn't exist, except as someone to deceive, to maintain appearances for. It all came to a head a week later. I knew I had to confront her, but confrontation was terrifying. It wasn't just anger. It was the vulnerability, the exposure of knowing someone's betrayal, yet feeling powerless to undo the damage. When she finally came home, she walked in as if nothing had changed. Same perfume, same laugh, same smile that had ensnared me years ago. I wanted to scream, to throw everything I could find, to make her see the destruction she had caused. But instead I stayed frozen. Words lodged in my throat. Eventually I said it, the simplest, most dangerous words imaginable, I know. Her expression shifted, the practiced mask faltering for a split second, before she plastered on something close to calm. And in that instant the dynamic changed. There was no argument, no begging, no tears, just the raw, cold acknowledgement that things were broken beyond repair. And for the first time I felt the full weight of what had happened. The betrayal wasn't just a moment. It was a rupture that would take months, maybe years, to fully comprehend. That night, I sat alone on the edge of the bed, Jasper curled at my feet, staring at the wall as if it held answers. I didn't know then that this was just the beginning. The breaking point, I realized, wasn't just discovering her secret. The breaking point was understanding that the life I thought I had, the love I thought I knew, had been a lie. And the person I loved most had been complicit in it. Every smile, every touch, every word, a carefully crafted performance. The days after that night blurred together like a half-remembered dream, heavy and colorless. Every routine, every familiar corner of my life felt tainted. I would wake up, and the first thought that hit me was not about work, not about what I had planned for the day, but about her. About her and the other man. About how long this had been going on. How long had she been living this parallel life while I pretended everything was normal? The questions kept me awake, circling my mind like vultures, feeding on the remnants of trust I thought was unshakable. I didn't leave the apartment much. Work became impossible. Every email, every notification felt like a personal attack. Even the projects I once loved, the ones I'd poured hours into designing websites for small businesses, suddenly seemed meaningless. My laptop was open, but my focus evaporated in the harsh fluorescent glow of the screen. I would sit there for hours, staring at lines of code I barely remembered writing, haunted by the image of her laughing in that hidden apartment, free from the obligations, from me. Friends and family noticed the change. My mom called more frequently than usual, her voice laced with concern, asking if everything was all right. I told her I was fine, but that was a lie. The truth was too raw, too embarrassing, too heartbreaking. I couldn't tell her that my wife of 3 years had effectively erased me from a part of her life. That the woman I had shared every mundane and sacred moment with had a hidden narrative I wasn't allowed to touch. Even small things became unbearable triggers. I walked past the cafe where we'd shared late-night chai lattes in the early years of our relationship and felt a punch in the stomach, a reminder of what had been, what was gone. The streets of Brooklyn, once comforting in their chaotic familiarity, now felt like a stage on which my own life had been performed and manipulated without my knowledge. The scent of roasted chestnuts from street vendors, the faint hint of autumn leaves mixed with exhaust fumes, all of it reminded me of betrayal in some cruel, almost cinematic way. Sleep became a stranger. When I did manage to drift off, the dreams were worse than reality, vivid, surreal, and impossible to shake. I would see her smiling at me in one moment, then laughing with him in the next. Her voice a haunting echo that lingered long after I woke up. I would wake drenched in sweat, heart pounding, the early morning sunlight cutting through the blinds like an accusatory spotlight. I didn't cry much at first, not openly. Crying felt like admitting defeat, and I wasn't ready for that. But the quiet desperation, the slow erosion of my sense of self, ate at me from the inside. Work, when I forced myself to attempt it, became a ritual of distraction. I would dive into projects, answering emails mechanically, designing websites in a foggy trance. My clients noticed the subtle decline in quality, but they didn't question it. No one asked why I was suddenly absent from Zoom meetings or why my usual fast turnaround had slowed to a crawl. I couldn't explain it, even to myself. How could I explain that the person I had trusted with my entire life had built a hidden apartment and another life where I didn't exist? And then there were the small, unavoidable reminders in our apartment. The mugs she liked to drink from. The throw blankets she left draped over the couch. The faint scent of her perfume still lingering in the hallway. Each one felt like a knife in the gut. I would sit on the couch for hours, Jasper curled against me, staring at the wall, trying to erase the image of her from my mind, to will myself back to the person I had been before the rupture. But memory is stubborn, and grief even more so. Family gatherings became minefields. My parents, sensing something was wrong, would press for answers. I would smile politely, make small talk, nod along as they recounted their lives and the mundane dramas of my younger siblings. Every time Olivia's name came up, my chest tightened. I couldn't bear to speak it aloud, to acknowledge the betrayal in front of people who didn't understand. I wanted to scream, to cry, to collapse under the weight of it all, but instead I smiled and nodded, a hollow actor in the play of my own life. Social media didn't help. Mutual friends posted photos of happy weekends, brunches, vacations, couples' selfies. All of it a cruel, constant reminder of what I was missing. The temptation to dig into her digital life, to see if there were more clues, more proof, gnawed at me. But I resisted, knowing that each click would shred whatever remnants of my sanity I had left. Still, the urge lingered, a constant low hum beneath every thought. There were moments, rare but piercing, where anger replaced the numbness. I would imagine confronting her, yelling until my throat burned, demanding answers, demanding apologies. I would replay every detail, every secret, and imagine scenarios in which justice, or at least revenge, was mine. But the anger was always temporary. It was quickly replaced by the dull ache of loss, by the quiet terror of realizing that the person I loved most had no qualms about deceiving me. One particularly bad night, I found myself wandering the streets of Manhattan at 2 a.m., my coat wrapped tightly around me, the wind biting through the layers. The city was alive, as always, but I felt invisible, untethered, like a ghost watching a life I was no longer part of. I stopped at the Brooklyn Bridge, staring out over the East River, the water black and reflective, mirroring the turmoil inside me. I thought about the future, or the absence of it, and I realized something terrifying. I had no idea who I was without her. Everything I had built, everything I had believed in, felt meaningless. I tried therapy, at least briefly, sitting in that office, recounting the events, speaking them aloud. I thought it might help, but it didn't. Words felt inadequate, like trying to explain color to someone who had never seen. How do you convey the depth of betrayal, the fracturing of trust, the sense of living alongside a stranger who was once your soulmate? The sessions ended after a few weeks, not because the therapist was ineffective, but because I couldn't make the words stick. I was too raw, too fractured, too lost in the spiral of memory and grief. Even my body betrayed me. I started skipping meals, losing weight, my eyes hollow, my hands shaking during phone calls. Friends grew concerned, but I pushed them away. I didn't want pity, didn't want the well-meaning advice of people who hadn't lived it, who hadn't had their entire world quietly dismantled by someone they trusted completely. The apartment itself became a crucible of memory. Every corner held reminders, every object a trigger. I couldn't bear to touch her things, couldn't bring myself to remove them. I would sit in silence, Jasper on my lap, staring at the wall, letting memories of laughter, love, and intimacy play like a cruel film on repeat. Sometimes I would catch myself laughing quietly at a memory, only to realize immediately after that it was a hollow laugh, a mockery of what had been, and all the while, the question lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. Why? Why had she done it? Was it me? Was it something I did, something I failed to do? Or was it simply that she was capable of living a life that didn't include me, and I had been blind enough, naive enough, to believe in a fidelity that never existed? The fallout didn't just reshape my days. It reshaped me. I became quieter, more guarded, more suspicious. I stopped trusting easily, stopped sharing my inner thoughts with anyone. Love felt dangerous now, intimacy felt risky, and the concept of forever became a cruel joke I could barely acknowledge. I felt exiled from my own life, a permanent outsider in a city that had once felt like home. After months of numbness and wandering through the wreckage of my life, something inside me shifted. I don't know exactly when it happened, whether it was the realization that I couldn't stay broken forever, or the quiet rage simmering beneath my grief, but I knew I couldn't remain a passive victim any longer. The apartment, the city, the memories, even Jasper's quiet, judgmental gaze, they all seemed to conspire together, pushing me to do something, to take control, to reclaim some fragment of the life that had been stolen. The first step was practical. I started digging, carefully, methodically. I traced her digital footprint, piecing together her movements, her patterns. Emails, social media, subtle hints in conversation, receipts, anything that might reveal more about this hidden life. It wasn't about revenge yet. It was about clarity. About understanding the extent of what I was up against. Every detail I uncovered made my stomach twist, but it also steeled something in me, sharpened my focus. Knowledge, I realized, was power. I also started reclaiming my space. The apartment, once a shrine to memories of betrayal, began to change. I moved her things, her perfumes, her throw pillows, the little trinkets she'd left around. As if by altering the physical environment, I could reclaim my mental and emotional territory. I repainted the bedroom walls a muted grey, a colour she had never liked, a colour I now loved. It was symbolic, I told myself. A statement that this was my life, my home, my body and my heart, even if pieces of it had been shattered. There were moments when the moral complexity of what I was doing hit me. I wasn't innocent here, not entirely. I had invaded her privacy, tracked her, watched her from a distance. But the betrayal had been so deep, so deliberate, that I allowed myself to justify it as research, as self-preservation. I wrestled with guilt, but it was outweighed by the need for control, by the need to stop feeling like a helpless character in someone else's story. One night, as I sifted through a folder of emails she had thought I'd never see, I stumbled upon something unexpected. A recurring pattern, a series of payments, small but regular, to places I didn't recognize. Apartment rentals, hotel stays, anonymous accounts. And then it clicked. This wasn't just a fling. This was a life she had meticulously built, parallel to ours, funded and maintained with precision. And in that realization, I felt the first spark of something I hadn't felt in months. Power. But the turning point wasn't about exposing her yet. It was about me. I began pushing myself, physically and mentally. Early morning runs along the East River, long stretches of meditation, therapy sessions focused not on the betrayal, but on reclaiming my self-worth. I reconnected with old friends, people I had neglected in the fog of my marriage. I started small, coffee meetups, walks in Central Park, casual conversations, but each interaction reminded me that life continued outside of her betrayal, that the world still had depth and color beyond the apartment walls, and yet the temptation to confront her lingered. It was almost magnetic. Every day I weighed the risk, the fallout, the potential for closure or escalation. There were nights I imagined confronting her in front of the hidden apartment, in front of him, letting the rage pour out in words, in accusations, in tears. But each time I imagined it, I realized that the real confrontation had to be internal first. I couldn't dismantle her world if I was still trapped in the ruins of my own. So I started planning carefully. Not a trap exactly, but a situation where clarity and truth would reveal themselves naturally. I reached out to the few people who might offer insight, mutual friends who were discreet, neighbors who might have noticed patterns. Each conversation was delicate. I had to mask my intent without lying outright, to extract information without appearing suspicious. The puzzle slowly began to come together piece by piece, and with every new detail, my confidence grew. Then came the day I realized something else. The betrayal had given me a clarity I never had before. It forced me to see my own weaknesses, the complacency that allowed someone to deceive me for so long. I'd been passive, too trusting, too willing to believe in the facade of a perfect marriage. And that realization ignited a fierce determination, not to destroy her, but to rebuild myself. Stronger, wiser, untouchable in ways I hadn't been before. The first direct step came when I arranged a chance encounter near her hidden apartment. Not to provoke, not to confront, but to observe. I wanted to see her in her element, to measure the extent of the life she had crafted without me. Hiding in plain sight, blending into the city's chaos, I watched as she carried herself with the ease of someone untouched by consequence. The sight should have broken me again, but it didn't. Instead, it steeled me. Every confident step she took, every laugh shared with him, became fuel for my own reclamation. I also started documenting everything. Every interaction, every trace, every piece of evidence I had gathered was carefully recorded. Not for revenge yet, but for certainty. I couldn't allow emotions to cloud judgment. I needed facts. And in doing this, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in months: control. It was intoxicating, almost addictive. This sense that I was no longer a victim, that the chaos of betrayal could be mapped, measured, and eventually managed. At the same time, I confronted myself about my future. Could I forgive her? Could I remain in a marriage fractured by deceit? The answers were unclear, but I knew one thing. I could no longer be passive. The rest of my life depended on action, on boundaries, on reclaiming dignity that had been quietly eroded. I started making plans, not just mental but practical, separating finances, rethinking living arrangements, even considering legal counsel, all while maintaining the facade of normalcy for appearance's sake. It was during this period of careful, deliberate action that I began to feel a slow transformation. The grief, the anger, the shock, they were still there, but they had become tools rather than chains. I was learning to wield them, to direct the energy inward, toward rebuilding myself. I wasn't healed yet, far from it, but I was no longer dissolving in despair. For the first time since discovering the secret apartment, I felt like I could step out of the shadow of betrayal and into some version of empowerment. By the end of the year, I had taken significant steps to reclaim control. The apartment no longer felt like a trap. It was my space again, infused with my energy, my routines, my reclamation of self. I was exercising, eating better, reconnecting with friends, and slowly, meticulously, laying the groundwork for whatever came next, whether that meant closure, confrontation, or complete detachment from the woman who had deceived me. And through it all, I realized something vital. Turning the tables wasn't about revenge or punishment. It wasn't about making her feel what I had felt, as much as part of me had wanted that. It was about reclaiming my life, my identity, my sense of self-worth. For months, she had controlled the narrative, dictated the emotional landscape, and dictated my reactions. But now, finally, I had shifted the balance. I was no longer the observer in her story. I was the author of the next chapter of my own life. It took months, long, grueling months, for the full weight of everything to settle into a semblance of clarity. By the time spring of 2020 rolled around, I had moved out of the apartment we once shared, leasing a small studio just a few blocks away, one with sunlight that actually reached the floor and a kitchen that smelled faintly of fresh paint. I wanted space to think, to breathe, to rebuild without the constant reminders of betrayal. The city was still alive, still chaotic, but now it felt like it belonged to me again, or at least like I could take back a portion of it. I had limited contact with Olivia after the initial confrontations. The legal paperwork was tedious but empowering. Separation agreements, joint accounts closed, the apartment emptied, and returned to her as a neutral space. I didn't gloat, I didn't confront her publicly. I'd realized long ago that revenge wasn't the point. The point was reclaiming my own life, my self-respect, my sanity. Every check signed, every account closed, every box of her things packed into the car and dropped off at her new address. Felt like reclaiming pieces of myself that had been scattered across months of deception. There were nights, though sometimes many nights, when the memories came back, unbidden. I would lie in the quiet of the new apartment, Jasper stretched across my chest, and hear the echo of her laugh, feel the phantom touch of her hand, imagine the apartment she had hidden from me in Williamsburg. The memories stung, sharp and insistent, and sometimes I thought I would never stop feeling the hollow ache of what was lost. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the edges softened. Time, therapy, and the deliberate act of building a life for myself began to dull the rawness. I also began to date again, carefully, slowly, tentatively. It was terrifying at first. The thought of opening my heart, of allowing someone new in, felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down at an abyss I had fallen into once and not survived. But human nature has a stubborn way of healing, even when it's reluctant. I met someone, a woman named Hannah, through a friend in early 2021. She was kind, attentive, and fiercely intelligent, the kind of person who challenged me to see the world differently. There were moments when I would catch myself flinching at her laughter, half expecting echoes of the past to creep in, but slowly, her presence became a balm rather than a trigger. I also reconnected with old friends in ways I hadn't done in years. Weekend hikes, coffee mornings, casual dinners in the city, mundane, ordinary things that reminded me that life wasn't only defined by betrayal. That there were still joys, small but real, still moments of connection, of laughter, of peace. I learned to appreciate the small victories, waking up without dread, laughing without restraint, sleeping without reliving the night I discovered the secret apartment, one of the hardest, And yet most freeing realizations was that I could never fully understand why Olivia had done what she did. I could analyze patterns, trace digital footprints, reconstruct scenarios, but I would never truly inhabit her mind, her motivations, her decisions. At first, that ambiguity drove me insane. I wanted reasons, explanations, some neat narrative that made sense. Eventually, I accepted that some betrayals are permanent enigmas, pieces, of someone else's story that you can observe, but never fully own, and with that, acceptance came peace of a kind I hadn't thought possible during the months of raw grief. It wasn't the kind of euphoric happiness movies promise. It was quieter, steadier. It was the knowledge that I had survived, that I had reclaimed my life, that I had not allowed betrayal to define me. The scars remained, they always will, but they were proof not of weakness, but of endurance, of resilience, of the ability to navigate the jagged edges of human relationships and still find footing. In retrospect, the entire ordeal taught me something I hadn't realized before. Love, trust, and loyalty are precious, but they are not guarantees. They are choices, repeated daily by everyone involved. And when those choices are violated, the path forward is never straightforward. You can crumble, you can rage, you can sink into despair, or you can rebuild, stronger, wiser, and more fiercely yourself than you ever were. I think back now to that night on Monroe Street, coffee cup in hand, staring at a city that felt indifferent to my suffering. I remember the panic, the hollow ache, the sense of a life unmooring. And I realize how far I've come, from that raw, shattered place to a life that, while different from what I imagined, feels real, mine, and grounded in my own choices. Olivia. She exists in the past now, a chapter I have read, reread, and finally closed. I don't hate her. I don't need to. The betrayal was hers to carry. The lessons, the growth, the reclamation, that was mine. Some nights I still think about the hidden apartment, the man, the secret life she led. But now it's curiosity, not agony. A quiet, reflective acknowledgement that human hearts are messy, that life is unpredictable, and that survival is not just enduring, but thriving in spite of the things that break you. And as I pour a fresh cup of coffee each morning, sit on the sunlit floor of my studio, and watch Jasper chase sunbeams across the walls, I feel something I thought I'd lost forever: control, peace, a fragile but undeniable hope. Life, I've learned, is never perfect, but it can be reclaimed, and sometimes reclaiming it is the most powerful act of all.